Welcome to the Arabesque Scissors YouTube channel. I'm Ali Phillips, and in this video I'll be demonstrating how to do a faux needle turn technique so that you can make this cute little applique mat. So the product I'll be demonstrating today is an interfacing called Polyfuse, which is a fusible wash away interfacing that we fuse to the wrong side of a shape, and then we glue baste the seam allowance of that shape around the shape to create the template that we need to applique. Now, if you love sewing instructional videos like this, please consider giving this video a like and hitting that subscribe button. Now, my favorite thing about a project like this is that all the hard work is done right at the beginning of the project. You can achieve those beautifully smooth curves and pointy points right at the beginning. Then all you need to do is gather up your shapes and your background fabric and head to the couch so you can relax with a good movie. Find the link to this little trio of applique mats in the description below, or head to arabesquescissors.com. So the main mat that I'm going to be demonstrating today is the Lotus version, and the reason I will be doing this is because it incorporates most of the techniques that are in the first mat, the olive design, and it also incorporates the internal points, which are the other trickier bit. So if you would like a tutorial on how to do these quite pointy external points, I can add one of them at a later time. But today we're just going to be focusing on the Lotus mat. So you need to gather your materials. So the main technique that I'll be sharing with you today is how to use this SewFuse wash away interfacing, and this is fusible interfacing that you're going to fuse to the wrong side of your fabric, or the wrong side of your shape, and then we're going to glue baste the fabric around each of these shapes and then applique that onto the fabric. And this stays inside the shape, and at a later date, if you wash the product, this will wash away. But if you don't wash it, it adds just a nice amount of loft to the project, and also it's really good for preventing shadowing if you've got like a very light colour or sheer fabric. It will add an extra layer of opaqueness so that your colour will actually really show out from your background fabric. So the other thing I also like to use when I'm doing one of these little mats is I like to fuse a layer of woven interfacing to the back of the background fabric. And I find this just gives your fabric just a bit of body and helps you just be able to get a really nice smooth finish at the end with less puckers in the background fabric. So you're going to need to go and fuse that together. The next things that we're going to need is a glue pen for glue basting the shapes, some small sharp scissors, a fabric safe pen. I will be using a friction pen here today. And if you don't have one of these, or you would prefer a different pen, go ahead and use that. I'm also using a small milliner's needle here, and you can vary this depending on the size of the eye that you would prefer. And also got a ruler for ruling up the lines for this, and also some fine strong polyester thread. And you don't need all these colours, but it can be really handy to match this to your project. If you've only got white or a blender colour, that works really well as well. So I'm just going to go and share my design process here. So for this mat, I generally like to start with my binding fabric, and I like to choose a floral that I am really crazy about. I like all the colours in this. I believe this is a 7-berry Japanese print here. And then what I will do for this design is just pull out 3, maybe 4 solids for this, the solid shapes that we'll be doing. So I've got the green here, the nice bright pink, and a very bright red. And then I'm also going to choose a perlite thread that I'm also going to do my embroidery and hand quilting with afterwards, and this just pulls out the nice peachy colour in here. And the last thing I'm going to choose is some trim, and this needs to be between 1/2 inch and about 1 inch wide, and this is just going to cover the join of the binding and make a nice little feature on the little mug rug that I'll be making today. So I've got my background fabric prepared here. I've fused my woven interfacing behind here, and also got my 3 solids here that I've cut out ready to trace my templates onto. So you're going to want to just roughly center a 4 3/4 inch square here over your background fabric. So I'm just going to rule a square here that measures 4 3/4 inches. Okay, we're going to rule an X from each diagonal, like so. And finally, we're going to rule a vertical line through the center here, and a second one through the horizontal here. And hopefully, if you've done this accurately, you're going to have all of your lines meeting nicely in the center here. So you can set this aside now. This is all prepared, ready for stitching everything on. The next thing you need to do is grab your Polyfuse interfacing and your templates here for your pattern. So the pattern tells you that you need to trace 4 lotus flowers, 8 leaves, and 1 center square. So I'm just going to place that over here, like so, and just as accurately as I can, I'm just going to trace each of these shapes. So I've got 1 square, I need 8 leaves. You can put these nice and close together. And just pretend I've done 8 more leaves there. And then we're going to need 4 lotus flowers. I just find it easier to trace with the dash line. Okay, so go ahead and trace the rest of these. So you need to be mindful here that when you're working with these sorts of shapes, that every step that you do is going to add a layer of inaccuracy to your work. So beginning with the tracing, you need to trace as accurately as you can, because if you trace just slightly off the line and then you cut out just slightly off the line, each step is going to magnify the inaccuracy that you get. And so if you can try and keep every step as accurate as possible, you're going to get a much smoother and more even end result. So now you can go ahead and cut these out. So just like to roughly cut them first, and then go around and just stay on the outside of the line here. Just cut as neatly as you can. Here we are at the iron. So you're going to want to make sure if your fabric has a right side and a wrong side that you have the wrong side up. And you also need to double check that when you are fusing your shapes into place that you have the shiny side facing downwards. So this little square is going to go on my red fabric here, and I'm actually, because this has got nice straight sides, I'm going to make sure that this is lining up with the grain of the fabric. I'm just going to take my fabric, my iron, and give that a good fuse into place. And then just check that that's adhering, and if it isn't, just give it a little bit longer. That's stuck fairly well now. So just set that to the side and you can move on. I'm going to do my lotus flowers next. Now what I like to remember is when I'm working with any shape that has a curve, I like to use the bias of my fabric. So you can see here we've got the straight grain and here we've got the cross grain, and diagonal to both of them we have the bias of the fabric. And the bias of the fabric, if you're aware of that, when you stretch it, will actually give an ease around curves quite nicely. So what you want to think of is when you're placing this is not to just sort of put it down any old direction, but think about where the bias is going to come on the curve of the shape and just try and maximize that to your advantage here. So I'm placing these two shapes apart. I'm going to face them this way so that the bias is going to be the right direction for these curves, and I'm making sure that I'm leaving enough room for a seam allowance here of about 4 to 5 mils here. And I've got my 4 lotus flowers here, just going to space them apart like that and then just fuse them into place. And then last but not least, we're going to take the 8 leaves that we've got here, and when I do a leaf I actually like to put this on the 45 degrees so that the bias of the fabric is going to work very nicely around all of those leaves there. So just space those apart, just double checking that you've got the shiny side of your interfacing facing down here, and just space them apart so that you're going to have enough seam allowance to be able to cut them all out. So now we're ready to cut these out. So I'm just going to cut an eyeball a seam allowance around these shapes. And I'll just demonstrate with a couple of these leaves here. So I always like to cut out roughly first, and you don't have the whole weight of the fabric and all the pieces dragging on that, just making it harder for you to cut neatly. So with this I actually like to have an even narrower seam allowance depending on the size of the shape. And you sort of just have to go by experience with this. If you find that you're having great trouble getting this to press around here nice and smoothly, it generally means that your seam allowance is just a bit too big. So you can just go back and just trim just a fraction more off. And you'll generally have a lot more success in getting a nice smooth edge to your curves if you just have a slightly narrower seam allowance there. So I'm just going to go and cut out one of these lotus flowers. Okay, so for these ones I'm actually going to have an even smaller seam allowance. So we're probably at the 4mm seam allowance here now. Also, okay, so I'm just going to start by glue basting the square first, because this one's going to be the easiest because it has straight edges. So just take your glue, and I'm going to wipe some glue right along the very edge of the template here, and I'm going to make sure my glue goes right up onto the edges of my fabric here, and then I'm going to support the edge without touching the glue and slide my other finger down under here and just press that over the edge of that paper interfacing there, and just push that down, and then I'm going to flip that over and just repeat that process. So I am putting a fair bit of glue on here, but I'm only going just about as wide as the seam allowance that I have here. And I'm just feeling where the edge of that paper is with my finger, and I'm just pressing that down. So then I'm going to go onto the two remaining sides, swipe enough glue there just to push that into place, and then flip that around and just finish that last side there. And just turn it over and have a look at it. So if you want to, you can go back in to these corners here where you have a bit more of the fabric bulk, and you can just trim some of that away. You don't want to get too close to your point there though, so just leaving a couple of millimeters from the point there. And the other thing you can do is even just open it up a little bit and just trim that first layer there, and then just push that back down so there's even just one less layer there. Okay, so now I'm just going to move on to glue basting the leaf here. So I like to start just on one side. I'm going to start my glue right on top of that seam allowance of that fabric there, and wipe it all the way along until I get to the other seam allowance. And then I'm just going to start at the bottom here, and I'm just going to push a really small amount over onto the glue, and I'm really only working not even as wide as my fingertip there, and I'm just pushing, mainly trying to just feel the edge of that interfacing there and pushing that into place. If you turn that over, you can see that that is a nice smooth curve. Now, like I said, if you're finding that your curve is not very smooth, could be that your seam allowance is just a bit too wide and you might need to just trim a bit more off. Could also mean that you're just pressing a little bit too much at a time over the edge of that. Then we're going to work our way down the other side. The main thing that we're after is to not have any pleats on the very, very edge. It's fine to have pleats on further on inside where they're not going to be seen. So there we've got one leaf done. So what you'll generally find is that as you go, you're going to improve with your technique, and you probably want to go back and do your first ones over again. Okay, so now we're ready to do the lotus flower, and the new technique that we're going to learn here is how to do an internal curve, because you'll find that you can't fold the seam allowance around this internal point until you've actually snipped the little point open here. So we're just going to snip into this corner not the entire way, not right up to the interfacing, but pretty close. And what this is going to do is just mean that this can open up. So I'm just going to start here, folding this internal point down. You can see that that spreads open really nicely. And then we can work our way around like that. And we're going to move on to the next one. So pulling that apart. Now you'll see here, we do have just some very slight raw edges in these points here, which might possibly show. And what we do is when we are up to appliquing this particular part in, you can just take your needle or just the tip of your scissors and you can poke them in and tuck everything in nice and neatly so that you don't have to have any of them showing. So just go and wipe your glue just around the remaining edge of your shape there, and then we're just going to tuck just like we did for the leaf, a very small section at a time, just easing your way around. And the forgiving part about this is that if you do get a little pucker or bump on the edge of it, you can actually pull with your finger and push and just manipulate that edge and smooth it out. The more that you do of these, the more faster that you're going to get. So you might be looking reasonably critically at your shape here, thinking that it's not as smooth as you'd like it to be. But the good thing about this is that when you do come to applique this in place, this is a very forgiving technique and you'll be able to even that out even a little bit more.